Aquapolis Scizor is probably the most recognizable and famous of the E-cards, just because it's one of the only few that actually saw its way into standard play, not just that, it did win a world championship. We've talked about this card quite a bit in other formats and just how well it pairs with Furret. So it doesn't require a whole lot of thought to go, well, Scizor is an E-card and Furret's an E-card, why not just pull it back out and see how it does? It still does very well. Even without Muck, even without all the overpowered trainer cards, Scizor is still a solid card on its own. Maybe even more so in E-card where Scizor's Pokebody actually comes into play. There's a lot of cards trying to poison you in E-card, and Scizor doesn't care about them. It's a Pokebody, so you're not going to be shutting it off with any other type of special condition either. Because Scizor is a steel type, it's able to fully utilize those special metal energies and decrease incoming damage for as many of those metal energies that are attached. Plus, you have even more reason to attach them because heavy metal is a super good attack. Given your coin flipping ability, you can deal a lot of damage for 3 energy off of heavy metal, and that's just an added bonus to the reduction of incoming damage that you're already getting from those special metals. This is one of the few instances where you actually want to attach 2 or 3 special metals all to the same Pokemon, just so you can hit those heavy metal flips, give yourself as much of a chance as possible to do that bonus damage. Furret's Scavenger Hunt power allows you to easily search your deck for those special metal energy by trading 2 cards in your hand for any type of energy card that you want to grab from your deck. It doesn't have to be special metal, sometimes you want a rainbow or a warp energy. Whatever it is, Furret serves as a reliable and consistent way to get whatever energy you want. There's really not a whole lot more you can say about this deck without getting directly into the deck list, so let's just do that now. Deck list! What do you know, we're starting off with a 50 HP basic. It's gonna be a Scyther and we're running 3 of them. Yes, even though Scizor is your primary attacker, we're only going to be running a 3-3 line of Scizor. And that's because this deck really values its support Pokemon and its coverage Pokemon. Plus, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to have 4 copies of Scizor in here since you are going to be loading down each Scizor with 2 or 3 special metals. Realistically, you're only really going to be attacking with 2 Scizor per game. So why not make some more room for other Pokemon lines, namely your Furret line. Gonna be running a 2-2 Furret, another Pokemon that is vital to the success of this deck, but you only need 1 of them on the bench. You're not gonna be tossing away 4 cards on your turn to get 2 energy cards when you can only attach 1 of them that turn, unless you're just really wanting to thin your deck. But if that's the case, then just play a Porygon2 and you're going to be able to thin a lot faster. Porygon2 is always a great partner for Furret because you are basically getting rid of 2 cards in your hand for an energy card that you're probably going to attach that turn anyway, and so your hand's going to be running low. You can replenish your hand with Porygon2's Pokemon power. And now we get to the coverage side of the deck, and with a full playset of Eevee, you can probably see that I'm going with the Eeveelution route for my coverage Pokemon. I'm not as big on using the legendary birds, they're a little bit more difficult to use. I'd rather just run the full playset of Eevee, and then whatever Eeveelutions are going to cover the types of weaknesses you want to hit. So first of all, I'm running 2 copies of Flareon, so that I can hit those big grass type decks for weakness, as well as opposing Scizor decks. The other 2 Eeveelutions are going to be Vaporeon, to help cover Scizor's weakness to fire. This deck is really just a hate deck almost against those special condition grass type decks that are pretty big in the format, because Scizor can't be poisoned. Flareon and Vaporeon can heal all special conditions just by attaching an energy from your hand, but that's also why this is one of the top decks of E-card. For the supporter base, we're going to be seeing a full playset of Fan Club and a full playset of Pedum. Who would have guessed, right? With this many different Pokemon lines, you absolutely need the Fan Clubs and the Professor Elm's training method just to search out all of the cards that you need. And then the additional draw support's going to be coming from Professor Oak's research. There's going to be a 3 of for Professor Oak because I only own 3 of them. But also running a 3 of Underground Expedition. I actually like Underground Expedition better than Professor Oak's research. I like knowing what's on the bottom of my deck because that informs what I'm likely to top deck, which also informs whether or not I want to get rid of some cards in my hand so that I can use Porygon2's ability and try to top deck what I'm looking for. You've probably heard me talk about how 60 damage is kind of the magic number for E-card, and a lot of times Scizor is going to be hitting for 50. Which is not good if that turns a 2-hit KO into a 3-hit KO, so a couple copies of Strength Charm in here. Those are also going to be applicable to Flareon and Vaporeon for hitting those magic numbers. Friend Ball is also a solid addition to any deck that's running a lot of different types of Pokemon, so in this deck, we're running Grass, Metal, Normal, Fire, Water. Odds are you're going to be able to use Friend Ball to get something out of your deck. Energy removal isn't super common in E-card, but it does still exist, and that is one of the big enemies of Scizor. And so, whether it's from knockouts or energy removal that your opponent's playing, we run a full play set of Power Charge, because you have to flip a coin. So really, if you're playing the odds, only 2 of these are going to be usable, but you do need those special energy back as quickly as possible. So full playset of Power Charge. Now with those special metals attached to Scizor, it's going to be pretty bulky, but it's not going to be, completely immune to some really heavy damage that some decks can put out, namely Ninetales. Against that deck, it doesn't matter how many metal energy you have stacked, you're going to get KO'd. But against most decks, you're going to be looking at getting hit with 30 damage per turn, maybe 40, depending on what you're up against. But in order to mitigate that a little bit and make that Scizor last as long as possible, I've got a couple copies of Potion in here that can be really frustrating when your opponent thinks that they're set up for a 2-hit knockout and you just play 1 potion and then they fall just short of that, so you get another turn of heavy metal damage. We of course have the full playset of Special Metal and then a full playset of Rainbow Energy, so that you can fully utilize the Flareon, Vaporeon, whatever the matchup calls for. A couple copies of Warp Energy to work around Scizor's retreat cost, that way you're not having to discard anything. And then a full playset of Cyclone Energy, which is basically your version of Gust. Your opponent is going to want to wall and stall against Scizor. This is going to be your way to say, nuh-uh, I'm not letting you hide on the bench and get your setup. Pull something into the active position because I'm going to hit it with heavy metal. You can also pull off a really frustrating turn 2 move where you attach a Cyclone Energy, and if your opponent doesn't move the Pokemon you wanted them to into the active position, then you can use Snatch and just yank whatever low HP Pokemon your opponent has on the bench into the active position and hit it for 20. Which then puts your opponent in the position of going, well, do I just leave this unevolved Pokemon in the active position, or do I evolve it with damage counters on it and just risk an easier knockout later? Scizor's weakness to Fire is one of the primary reasons that Fire is such a big archetype in E-card, and honestly I think just having coverage in the deck is your best option against Fire. I think Psyduck is another decent coverage card just because you don't have to overcomplicate your deck with any evolutions. You don't even have to put Water Energy in your deck because you can hit for 20 with Psyduck off of just whatever you have on hand. And it's definitely easier to use than Articuno or Starmie or Quagsire or Vaporeon. You also have Weakness Guard, which you can use to just attach when you anticipate you're gonna get hit by a fire type move, but against every type of deck that isn't fire, you're not gonna use it. Plus, it only lasts for a turn, which is very disappointing. If this was a tool card that you could attach, then it would be in every deck in E-card probably. I wouldn't recommend making space in your deck for Weakness Guard, but it is an option. As an alternative to using Cyclone Energy, you also have Pokemon Reversal. It's just not as consistent because you have to flip a coin. Because of the coin flip, I tend to go a little heavier on Cyclone Energy and using Snatch every now and then, but the upside to Pokemon Reversal is it doesn't matter where the damage counters are on your opponent's Pokemon, and you get to pick what Pokemon's getting gusted out. Reversal is just a depowered version of Gust of Wind, but your mileage will vary depending on coin flips. Scizor has a pretty good matchup against any deck that isn't fire type, and even then it can bounce back pretty quickly as long as your opponent doesn't have a super solid fire setup. This deck does struggle against energy removal, so especially against decks like Kingdra that are pretty heavy on energy removal, Scizor can struggle a little bit. Where it absolutely dominates is against grass decks. Grass Decks can't really do much to Scizor. Yeah, Beedrill can paralyze it, but Beedrill's not going to be able to deal poison damage between turns, which really hurts it. Vileplume can't poison it. Those Grass Decks aren't hitting super hard outside of poison damage between turns, so the special metals attached to Scizor are going to make that even less per turn. Scizor is just a solid option all around. Those are my thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts. Opinions, experiences, requests, chuck them all down there in the comments. Like and subscribe to feed the hungry algorithm, and thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos as much as I've enjoyed putting them together over the past 24 months. Jeez. See you next video.